I wanted to start with maybe you've had a chance to read this on your screen. Can someone confirm that you're seeing the big screen, or are you seeing my screen with all the notes on it?
The big screen.
Big screen, big screen.
Big screen.
Great, thank you. My other screen's a mess with all kinds of notes, so I appreciate that. So Laszlo Bock, if you're not familiar with him, I would really encourage you to follow him on Google. He is, well, look at his title, right? Vice President of People Operations. How cool a title would that be? But he's really, really good if you're getting into interviews, or if you're going to be helping your mentor leader with that. He's just got all kinds of tips on good practices in the area of interviewing as well, and overall human resource management. So I'm a big fan of him. So I like what he talks about in the first paragraph. The number one thing we look for is general cognitive ability when he's looking for new people at Google. And then the second one that I want to focus on is the idea of leadership, and not that traditional leadership as he defines it, but that emergent leadership. So at the appropriate time, do you know when to step in and lead? And then the next line is probably my favorite, and just as critically, do you step back and stop leading when do you let someone else step in, right? Because what's critical to be an effective leader in his environment is that you have to be willing to relinquish power. We'll talk more about that idea of power. We'll look at a couple pieces by Andy Crouch. I think he's a great author on that idea of power. But it's a unique perspective that not too many people consider when they think about leadership, knowing when to relinquish power and allow someone else to have it. I think it's even harder for young leaders because you're gonna feel like you're incompetent if you do that, right, in front of a faculty or staff. But it's a really valuable concept in leadership, and I'm glad Laszlo is making us aware of it. So I was talking with Amanda just a little bit before, and we talked about the opportunities to continually reflect on what type of leader are you. So we've done strength finders, you've done a review, or you've done a comparison to the ISIL standards, you've done Deal and Bowman's assessment now. So I hope I'm not killing this, but I want it to be a continual reflection on what type of leader are you. And then when you start thinking about what type of leader do you want to be, now we have a current reality baseline to measure against, and then be able to identify, hey, this is who I want to be as a school leader, and now what are the steps I need to do? What are the strategies I need to implement? Who do I need to talk to or connect with? What networks do I need to be a part of in order for me to become the leader that I need to be in my school and that God's calling me to be? So 2 learning targets for today. One is that idea that continually reflect on what type of leader are you, and thinking about Deal and Bowman's framework in particular. So we're gonna go through that. But as we think about that, I also want you to think about decision making. So we're going to focus on that bottom. Oh, my circle kind of I don't know, something got tweaked there. But anyway, the idea of being a reflective leader, and particularly the idea of what does it mean to be a decision maker. So my first challenge for you as we go into this is when we think about how the brain works, it's unbelievable. And to think that we're not even near close to understanding how the brain works makes me even stand more in awe of the way that we've been created. Thanks to advances in technology like functional MRI machines, researchers are beginning to kind of unravel this to a certain extent and figure out, how do humans make decisions? What parts of the brain fire when we're making decisions? And so it allows us to understand how the brain reasons, how we plan, how we solve, how we address problems, but even greater insight into how things affect the brain, like sleep deprivation, which I'm guessing many of you are suffering from at this time of year, drug abuse, which I hope you're not suffering from, neurological disorders, diseases, all those factors that eventually are going to affect the decision-making process. They suggest new behavioral and therapeutic ways to improve your health because of what we can track within the technology now that maps our brain. It makes me think a little bit about my great-grandmother. She had a lobotomy, right, where they removed part of that frontal lobe, and to think that was the treatment or the therapy for, in this case, for severe headaches. So we've come so far along since then, and we still have so much more to go. But if you think about the way the brain is wired, you might remember the word automaticity from your ed psych days, right? This is that ability to do things without occupying the mind with all those low-level details that are required of you. So it becomes an automatic response. It's a pattern or it's a habit. It's usually the result of a lot of learning and repetition and practice. Decision making can be like that, right? We can develop a decision making protocol that's going to allow us to hopefully make decisions well, but also make decisions more quickly, because we know how many decisions are made. I think the research shows for a classroom teacher, they make 1,500 decisions per day. And that includes intentional ones, right? Like what book am I going to read to the preschoolers today? But also all those unintentional ones that come up during the day. But that's a lot of decisions. And if I had to stop at every intersection where that decision needed to be made, I wouldn't be able to make it through the day, right? So that automaticity is really important as we develop the skill of decision making. Some people refer to it kind of like a court trial. The brain is having a court trial every time it has to make a decision. Sights, sounds, other sensory evidence are entered and registered within the circuits of the brain. Other parts of the brain act as the jury. They compile and they weigh the evidence that's being presented. And when all the accumulated evidence reaches a kind of a critical threshold, then a decision is made or a behavior is undertaken. There's a new study actually that suggests that this decision making relies on two separate networks within the brain, which has me very interested in this as well. So if you think about the two systems, one of the system is the idea of valuation. How am I valuing what's going to happen? And then the other network that's happening at the same time, all those synapses are firing, is the idea of behavior. What am I going to do based on the valuation or even before the valuation? And then Aldous is the author of this study. He said that he defines something that this cognitive control is what is how we justify those two. And this is a neat analogy I like. So he said, your valuation network, that part is always providing you with information about what's rewarding around you. And he compares it to when you go to the store, the things that you want to buy. But there's also lots of distracting things like junk foods and People magazines and other things that keep popping into your vision off the shelf or when you're standing in line. Cognitive control is what keeps this network, this valuation network in check. To be able to get to the checkout counter with what you planned, you need to maintain a goal in mind, such as perhaps only buying the salad that you need for dinner, says Adolph. So that's your cognitive control network, maintaining an overall goal despite lots of distractions. So we're only starting to scratch that surface, right, about how the brain works. Thinking is still pretty poorly understood, but it involves interactions between those pathways that are signaling each other, that are carrying information about the world back and forth. Reminds me of like driving in Chicago, downtown Chicago, right? There's so much traffic happening in your brain. It's amazing to me that we've been created in a way that it makes sense. But when Adolph also talks about this idea of winner take all and risk versus reward. So that valuation network is part of that risk versus reward network. But then decision making, he says, appears to be a winner take all process in which all those different neuron clusters that have been firing, they represent alternate action choices, and they compete by inhibiting one another, which is just fascinating. Evidence supporting each choice increases the spiking activity of the neurons representing that choice. These neurons inhibit the neurons representing other choices. So it's this big traffic jam in your brain, right? People are cutting each other off in order to get there faster. And once that hypothesis or choice, once that one begins to take over the others, that activated neuron cluster, he calls it a cell assembly, that sets into motion a process of action and motor control that produces a behavior of some sort, either announcing a decision or taking an action. But again, I'm just fascinated by brain research, and it's amazing to think about just this simple act of making a decision, parts of the brain that are activated, and how that traffic pattern works within your brain between what this researcher says are two networks. So let's talk about a recent decision that's been made. So I want you to think about something that's been done at the administrative level of your school recently, a rather significant decision. I wonder if you would just throw that in the chat room. A rather significant decision being made by the administration in maybe in the last month or two.
I can go ahead and share. So my school district is in the process of trying to come up with a bond to be passed to create a new building, because the enrollment of my school has dramatically been increasing, that the elementary and the middle school are practically running out of room, literally. And so the board the other day just approved of a bond that's going to be presented to the public in December. So the administrators were working together to get that bond approved to release to the public.
Seth, that's a big decision, but it's going to work perfectly. So stay on the line here, because I want to ask you a few questions. All right, I'm going to read through a few other ones in the chat room, but I'll actually set you up here while we're reading through those. So I want you to think about, Seth, 4 factors that had to go into that decision making. The first one would be time. What's the urgency of making that decision? And then I'm going to ask you to think about what's the staff interest in that decision. The honey badger. What staff expertise is involved in making that decision? The importance or need for a high quality decision, and then the degree of need for buy-in or support of that decision. So you roll those around in your brain. I'm going to come right back to you. I'm going to read through a couple of the other ones in the chat room a minute as well.
Okay.
Oh wow, there are just some really big decisions, construction decisions, and even Mike, removing a book from grade 11 English course due to some concerns. That's a decision that had to be made too. So, these are excellent. All right, Seth, I'm coming back to you now.
All right. So so I've been at my school district for 5 years now, and in the last 8 years, the enrollment has been increasing by 22%. I teach at a 3A school district that's extremely diverse, where a bunch of families get to move in, because we have a couple of meat packing companies like Tyson, where a bunch of diverse families will move in from Hispanic cultures, from Asian cultures, and so on. And so gradually the building started to just kind of run out of room. At the middle school, we've had to give up a couple of computer labs to turn them into a classroom. We had to reduce the size of the family and consumer science room in order to build a classroom in there. A storage room has to be used as an office space for the instructional coach, and so on. At the elementary, there's just been so many classrooms that have been using, and even some of the hallways have to be used as classroom space. And so, and there's even one class that has, for 4th graders, that has like 40 kids in one classroom. And so I'd say, as far as the staff interest in the decision, is just probably mainly because there's been so many students that have been increased in enrollment, and as public school teachers, we know that kids benefit more in having smaller class sizes with around 20, 21 students in there. And so the past few years, we've been really pushing to try and get a bond passed, to get a bond out. And we just figured out an area where we could build a new early childhood center, so that way we could reduce the amount of room in the elementary and in the middle school.
Awesome. Let me go back to time. Thanks for setting the context. So actually the problem is affecting program now when you start putting people in out of classrooms, or not being able to use classrooms or technology labs or things like that. So how urgent do you think was the timing issue? I mean, was it to the point where the board had to make a decision without consulting others, or did they go through a consultation process with the community and staff and so forth?
That I'm not 100% sure on. We just know that if we don't get a new building built within the next few years, we'll literally run out of room at both elementary and the middle school.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. So that next factor for consideration when school leaders make decisions, right, is this idea of how interested are the staff in the decision. There was a researcher called Bernard who actually found that all individuals have this zone of indifference, right, where there's a point in which they simply will accept the leader's decision and are either apathetic or they just don't care as much about the decision. They just want a decision to be made. And in these cases, the leader wouldn't really benefit from trying to build participation or gain participation or collaboration with others. So how high is the level of interest in this decision that's being made?
Definitely really high, I would say. It's like probably one of the biggest priorities that our school district is making for this year, or probably the biggest priority to get
Absolutely.
that bond passed.
Yeah, yeah. And they need the staff's help, right, to pass a bond like that, I'm sure, because what the community is going to be talking to the staff about, yeah, do we really need this or not, you know? So
Hmm.
the interest is high. And how about staff expertise? So when you think about um, staff members who have higher levels of expertise, they need to either participate or collaborate in order to arrive at a successful decision.
Hmm.
Have the staff been consulted for their expertise? Like about if you go with an early childhood center, right? Is the
Hmm.
staff involved in the decisions for how to create that, how to design that?
Um, that I'm not so like 100% sure on. I know they've gotten like input over some of the veteran teachers over how it would benefit and what grade levels would go to that building, and then what grade levels will end up being at the elementary, and what grade levels will be at the middle school when those phases are complete.
No, that's good. Yeah, and I would hope they would really consult those teachers of those classes as
Hmm.
they design that facility. The fourth bullet there, importance of need for a high quality decision. We probably don't even have to talk about that, do we?
Probably not.
But for some of the other scenarios in there, I think some decisions are much more important and carry significant consequences, right? So
Hmm.
uh, this is usually the case for anything that we deal with in instruction and learning, whether directly or indirectly. And for important questions that demand that high quality decisions, it is best to collaborate, to use that collaborative model. But if the decision is relatively unimportant, then feel free as a leader to simply make the decision.
Hmm.
I think there are leaders who can overdo the collaboration. In fact, I'm guilty of that. I remember when we were looking at, we were growing at a pretty good rate too. I don't know if we were at 20%. That's pretty significant. But we ended up outgrowing the hot lunchroom, right? So I was wondering whether we should do staggered hot lunch or should we have two sessions or things like that. And I killed that thing in faculty meetings to the point where one teacher just stood up and said, "Tim, just make a decision. We don't care." So there, you have to know when to kill the collaboration model too. But that fourth bullet, I think, is the one to help you make that decision. And then the last one, Seth, this is probably a no-brainer too. But obviously, whenever you pass a bond, you need a what is the pass rate that you need? You know?
That I'm not 100% sure on. I know that at the school that I grew up in, they needed to get a 60% approval from the public. And because at the school I grew up at, we needed a bond to pass to add an auditorium and a couple of other additional classrooms. And then we ended up getting, I think, 77% approval. And so that wasn't a hard process. And so, yeah, I'm not exactly sure what we'll need. I'm going to guess around that percentage, but there again, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely in the ballpark. And of course, some boards will create a higher percentage if they really want this buy-in or support. Todd, I don't know if Todd Zylstra, are you able to unmute? I saw you were looking at phase two of an operation two at Kansas City Christian.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Todd. Tell us about your decision-making process for going forward.
We originally had a construction project that was all going to be one phase, and due to increasing construction costs and some mistakes that were made, we decided that we had to separate it out into well, essentially 2 phases. So this first phase of the construction project will end around Thanksgiving break of this school year, this fall. And so to begin phase 2 on June 1 of next summer, we need to get our design in place and get it approved by the city and get funding in place by January. But the only way we can move forward with phase 2 is if we sell one of our properties down south. We have a preschool that we sold on about 8 acres of prime real estate. That's worth about $3 million. And so we essentially have to make a decision on phase 2 without knowing whether or not we sold that property. And so we're trying to figure out, really, so for us, the time is the biggest barrier, because we just have a schedule that we're on, that we have to be on to be able to complete the project on time. But we have to make a decision before the sale of the property schedule will be in place. So yeah, so that's what we talked about till 10:45 on Monday night.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Can I ask Melissa, can you unmute as well and talk us through, I noticed you have a changing of school times. Can you talk us through the factors for consideration as that decision was being made?
Sure. We have a new superintendent. Can you hear me okay?
You bet. Thank you.
Yep. We just got a new superintendent in our school district, and this is his second year. And one of the big pushes at the end of last year was he was doing a lot of research on school start and end times. And previous to this year, our elementary started at roughly about 8:30, and our high school and middle schools were starting before 8 o'clock. And after doing some research, getting the school board, kind of the community input, he made the decision to switch those. So now our elementary teachers are contracted to be there at 7:15, with schools coming in or with the students coming in at 7:40. The day starts at 7:45 for them. And middle and high school, I believe that students come in at about 8:30, and then they get done right at 3:30. And I taught previously within the district that I'm working for now, and I loved it. We had school start time at 7:40, and I was done every day at 3:15. So there was a lot of pushback from a lot of parents because of daycare, and normal working parents aren't home at 3:15. So then a lot of parents argued, well, it's not going to save any effort or time on my middle and high schoolers, them getting more sleep, because they stay up, they're still going to stay up later, no matter if they have to start school an hour later or not. They're just going to stay up an hour later. So far it's running pretty smoothly though. Okay. A lot of our staff likes it. So elementary wise, I think it's been a good outcome. So
cool. Can you walk us through the factors and just kind of share a little bit on each one in terms of from your perspective?
Yeah. I kind of laugh because the staff interest, I think it kind of depends on what level you're at. Elementary, I think it worked out great for them because, they're driving by the other two schools while they're still in service, and, they're getting to go to Walmart and Target because their day's done with. I would say probably the staff expertise. There was a lot of weigh-in, and I think our superintendent did a really good job of listening to all, every side and every situation of pros and cons of this. But it was something that he really wanted, and I think he took everybody's vote into consideration. But, when it came down to it, he was the one referring to that. So for staff expertise, I think he just kind of looked at everybody's involvement and what they wanted and what they felt like was the best for their students. Importance of need for a high quality decision. This was probably one of the biggest decisions that we had, since it impacted every teacher, every grade, every level, from preschool all the way up to our graduating seniors, and degree of need for buy-in or support for the decision. I think no matter what decision he would have came to, there was going to be pushback on one end, just like there is in every decision that needs to be made. But I think he truly felt like what he was doing was research-based, showing that the younger kids can start earlier because, you know, their brains are ready to go, whereas as the kids get older, need a little bit more time to wake up and, you know, get their day going. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Are they collecting data on this decision? I mean, are they going to try to show that student achievement scores are different, or?
I think probably on his end to show that he made the right decision. I think there is some research being collected to show, you know what, this was the right decision. There was the research base behind this method. And so for him, I do believe that, and even with the school starting earlier, more of the core subjects can be taught in the morning. Whereas we know as the school day goes on, the more we ask out of kids, usually the less that we get out of kids, just because they're drained and they're tired. And once lunch hits, you know, they're in that food coma. And so we get out early every Wednesday because that's when our staff does professional development. And our early outs, our kids are done at 12:45. So then, wow. Yeah. So I think all in all, it's parents have kind of gotten stuck for the daycare situation, but I think all of that got taken care of, and all the schools offer before and after school programs, so that's helped out a lot.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a decision that doesn't maybe seem like it's a huge decision, but the waves it creates is unbelievable, right?
It is.
Good. Thank you so much. All right. Whoops, sorry. Let's jump into Bowman and Deal's framework. So you had a chance to assess yourself on that and identify kind of what frame you maybe is your preferred frame. But we're going to challenge you to think in about different frames during class today, and then I'm going to ask you to think through one particular frame, and I'm going to ask you not to choose your preferred frame to look through as we examine a case study together. But when we think about this idea of frames or how they define frames, it's a mental model, right? It's a context, it's a set of ideas and assumptions that you carry in your head as you navigate through whatever that territory is. And a good frame, they say, makes it easier to know what you're up against and ultimately what you can do about it. Frames are pretty vital in schools because schools don't come with any kind of GPS system to help us navigate the territory. So having these frames in mind or these ways of thinking helps us get to where we need to go. Again, using that traffic analogy. Because if you didn't have any map, right, if you didn't have any frame, if you didn't have any context, you'd have to stop at every intersection, and that slows things down a lot. I don't know how your color is going to be on your screen, but this is a visual that I find helpful when I think about this model of frames. So when I put this frame in front of this picture, there are certain things that pop out at you, right, that you notice or that you see. And if I change the frame, then there are other things that pop out, like maybe the canopies now you start to notice. If you only look through one, this reminds me of those old 4-pane windows like at my grandmother's house, right, where when you're only 3 years old, you can only look out one frame, but as you get bigger, you can see through all 4 frames and you see a much different picture. And when you overlay all 4 frames together, you see a very clear picture of what's out in front of you. So that's kind of the concept of this 4 framework model, knowing that we have a preferred frame that we tend to look through, but also understanding that there are other frames that we need to be able to examine. And what happens if we don't? All right, so here's this. We'll just go through this. So here's a conversation received via a ship's radio. Person number 1, your heading is incorrect. Please adjust heading 45 degrees west. Person number 2, negative. My heading is on course. Please adjust your position 45 degrees east. Person number 1, I repeat, your heading is incorrect and dangerous to both of us. Please adjust heading 45 degrees west. I say again, negative. My heading is on course and will not be altered. Adjust your position 45 degrees east. Sir, collision imminent. Adjust your course immediately 45 degrees west without delay. I am Captain James W. Smith of the United States American Navy in command of the USS Avenger. I demand that you adjust your course 45 degrees to the east or face the consequences. I'm the keeper of the Douglas Lighthouse on the Isle of Man. Do whatever you want. Now, if you had your mics on, I'm assuming you're all laughing at this because it's a parable, right? It's an urban legend. The Navy has actually debunked this because they don't want that kind of perception of their captains. But it reminds us of the dangers of being inflexible, right? Of only looking through one frame, or the danger of being self-important in the role that you're asked to do. But it also reminds us of the need for self-awareness. So as we look at these frames, maybe if you have a piece of scratch paper, I'll jot a few notes because again, I'm gonna put you in a breakout room in a few minutes, and you're going to choose one of the frames, again, not your preferred one, and you're going to have to look at the case study through that frame. So here's kind of a different look at these frames. The idea, I'm going to start in the bottom left with the idea of a structural frame. So the metaphor for a structural frame is the idea of a factory or of a machine. The basic leadership task here is to be able to divide the work and be able to coordinate the pieces. So if you have an image of this person in your mind, it's probably like there are certain people that are kind of like your institutional architects, right? They can figure out ways to analyze the problem and create a system, or a system engineer that's going to be able to fix it. If we think about what's the leadership logic of a person like this, it's rational, right? They can think very rationally. And if we talk about what currency they have, sometimes we refer to leadership currency, it would be clarity. So the emphasis for this frame is on the idea of formal roles and relationships. So when you think about a machine like the one pictured, right? Every part on that machine has a role in relationship to one another. Some key leadership assumptions for this frame is that specialization increases efficiency. And we've thought that at schools for a while, right? It's somewhat why we have disciplines and specialists in different areas. Clarity and control enhance performance, and problems then result from misalignment of the structure. So areas of analysis for this frame would be things like rules, roles, job descriptions, policies, procedures, org charts, things like that. So again, that's the bottom left, the idea of a structural frame. If I go up a frame, that one's called the political frame, and the metaphor for this within the academic institution is the idea of a jungle. The images of the leader then that we have are that of a strategist, a negotiator, an advocate, and the basic leadership task is to do that, is to bargain, negotiate, build coalitions, to set agendas, and to manage conflict. So if we think about the logic, the leadership logic for this position, it would be distributive justice, and the currency that this person would have would be the idea of empowerment. The emphasis for the frame is the allocation of power, and then the key leadership assumptions are that that differences are enduring, resources are scarce, conflict is inevitable, and key decisions involve who gets what. And if we talk about areas of analysis, it would be power, things like power, conflict, resources, agendas, coalitions, alliances, things like that. If I go to the right, where you see the picture of a group working together, that would be the human resources frame. And the metaphor for this in a school would be like your extended family. So the image would be like a coach or a parent or a catalyst, someone who gets it going. The basic leadership task for this frame then is to facilitate that alignment between both individual needs and organizational needs. The leadership logic would be just the attending to people, right? That would be seen through that human resource frame. And the currency is my ability to care for those within the system. The emphasis for the frame is satisfaction, motivation, productivity. And the key leadership assumptions are that we need each other within institutions, need individuals, individuals need institutions in order to thrive. Areas of analysis are I need to know what the needs are, who has the skills, what's the fit between the problem and the solution. And then the bottom right, is the symbolic frame. So the metaphor is the theater, or sometimes people talk about the temple being the metaphor for this one. The image of the academic leader is one of an artist or of a prophet. The basic leadership tasks are to be able to see possibilities, to be able to create a common vision, to manage the meaning. These are the storytellers within the organization. They can infuse passion, creativity, and soul. Leadership logic here is building shared meaning, right? Can we come together around a common vision and mission? And the currency that this person has is hope and promise. The emphasis is on, again, meaning, purpose, values within the organization. Key leadership assumptions are that people do interpret experience differently. Meaning making is a central organizational process. And the areas of analysis are culture, ritual, ceremonies, stories, myth, vision. So some of the things that I've asked you to look at when you're doing your cultural assessment, what are the rituals within the organization? Not ritual in a negative context by any means. I'll give you one more diagram to take a look at as you think about these 4 frames. If you want, feel free to snap a picture of that as we go into the next activity as well. So again, the 4 frames being structural, that's a factory. Human resource, family, political, jungle. Symbolic is the theater, the temple, carnival. You can see the central concepts, the images, challenges to that type of leadership, organizational ethic, and leadership contribution. So we're going to jump into our case study here. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. We talked about this already, I guess. Choose one frame and operate only within that frame to make a decision on this case. So don't think about any other frames. Just try to look through that one pane in the window at this case. And then explain your rationale for your decision to the group. So when you think about, if I'm going to look at this frame through the human resource frame, right? I'm going to be looking at needs, skills, relationship. How do I empower this person? How are the organizational or the individual and organizational or institutional needs aligned? Am I demonstrating caring and am I loving on this situation? So, and then after all 4 members have had a chance to state and explain their decision, then I want you to use all 4 frames to make a decision, and then I'll just randomly call on a couple groups when we come back to explain your decision with the larger group, and then I'll also share with you what happened in this situation. So I'll read through this with you. Keith worked in a small town with a small school. The applicants for the open 2nd grade teaching position had been few. The best of the group, though, were 2 women, one local candidate and the other from halfway across the country. The interviews were done, so the lengthy discussion about which one ought to be offered the contract. Now the board president turned to Keith, the principal, and said, "Okay, Keith, which one do you think we should hire?" Weeks earlier, Keith had read through all the applications and decided that 2 graduating seniors at a respected college and an experienced teacher from another state were the best 3 for the school. He had interviewed all 3 personally, narrowed the candidates down to the 2 college seniors. One was a local resident who had taken time to raise her family before returning to college to become certified to teach. She had volunteered in a school as a mother some years earlier. And the other was a 22-year-old single woman from 1,000 miles away. In his mind, Keith had a clear preference. The younger woman had ideas for educating children that seemed fresh, sensible, and exciting, while the local candidate he judged to be seeking the job more for income than for the love of children. He couldn't easily distinguish between them in many of the hiring rubric criteria. Both had been active participants in their community, were reasonably articulate about their philosophy of education, classroom management ideas, and had done well in their teaching performance. Both certainly gave the impression that they would each accept the contract were it offered to her. Both had good academic credentials and good recommendations. Good student and their student teaching reports confirmed the difference he had noticed about their teaching styles and interest. Keith presented the results of his search to the board prior to the board's interviews, but had not declared his preference. The board's interviews of the two candidates had gone well. In Keith's judgment, the local woman had clearly shown that her family needed the income and even offered, "I've given a lot to the school over the years. I know the school, the teachers, and the parents. I have prepared myself to teach and believe I can do the job." She was also first cousin of the current middle school English teacher. The younger applicant illustrated maturity beyond her years and even drew the board into responding to an idea she had for making math interesting. After the candidates had left the room, the board discussed the interviews and tipped their hands on their choice. One board member said, "I'm a little worried about the younger teacher playing games with kids. Besides, we owe it to this person in the community because she's really worked in the school and everybody knows her." Keith noticed that more than a couple board members nodded in agreement. And then another board member said, "We have to forget age and who's local. I think the younger woman is better qualified." The board president was getting impatient. "Keith, what do you say?" So that's the story. That's behind it. The problem that you need to solve then is, what is Keith going to say, and where does it go from here? So you're Keith in this story. So you have to make a decision and try to, the first round, you only get to look through one frame. And again, try to pick a frame that's not your preferred frame based on your assessment. We got kind of a bit of an odd number. So we might have to, somebody might have to think through two frames if they don't mind. So I'm going to go with 3 to 4 participants per room. You should get an invite in just a second. And yeah, have a discussion first. If you want to discuss about your frame as well, that would be interesting, the frame that you identified most closely with, and then choose a frame and then see what you guys decide.
Tim?
Hey, how are you?
Hi. My internet cut out, but I was in room 10. Is there a
I'm
way
so,
to reassign me?
I'm so sorry. We were waiting for you in room 10, and I joined room 10, and we didn't see you, so I reassigned those other two
Okay.
to fill 2 rooms. So I'm just going to throw you in a room, and you can just kind of listen in. Okay? I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Should have an invitation coming. Okay, I think we're back. So I have randomly selected breakout room 4, 7, and 11 to share with us. So I'd love to hear a little bit what you wrestled with and what decision you made, and who is Keith for breakout room number 4. Maybe you don't know what breakout rooms you're in. Let's see, breakout room number 4 was Kelsey, Mike, Nathan, and Tyler.
Yes, sorry, I did not know it was 4.
Sorry about that, Nathan. Thanks.
That's not good. I should have been more observant. So yes, it was interesting. We're in a group of 4 that all 4 of us lean towards human resources and structural. But this one was, and political seemed to be lowest. And so we spent quite a bit of time elaborating on political. It was neat to see the arguments with both directions of the hiring as far as being political. But I think that the argument for hiring someone locally, considering the repercussions that it might have in our community, as far as it being someone that the community knows, and not hiring that person, particularly if it's a small community, might do long-term damage. And also being political, realizing that there's obviously amongst the board members a bias towards that candidate. Honoring that would be politically correct.
All right, so you're going with the local candidate.
Local candidate would likely be politically correct.
Thanks. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it. All right, let's see. Breakout room number 7, Andrew, Becky, Joanne, Josh.
Yeah, we were split down the middle. We had human resource and rational for the younger candidate, and political and symbolic for the local candidate. We had more discussion, and I think we were still to split even as a group. We had some smaller school philosophy where we thought maybe a local person would be more invested in the school at a smaller school. But we also had one person in our group thought that bringing a young, fresh attitude and lots of new ideas to a smaller school would help revitalize the area as well. So someone else from the group can jump in. We didn't have a full consensus, but it was really good dialogue.
We didn't reach consensus yet. One thing I shared was at the beginning of tonight, you had shared that quote about knowing when to relinquish power. And so we thought that the younger gal, how she engaged with the school board and essentially required them to have a conversation with her, might indicate that she would be willing to step up into a leadership position inside the school district or in the building. So that might be a quality that we would be seeking.
So you are at a standstill on who to hire on this one.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's the first time. I like it. It's the first time I've had that, but that's great. So you that's a good example of taking both frames and they contradict each other. So you have to, I don't know where you're going to go from here, but I guess you guys are going to have to stay after class and figure that out tonight. So let's go with room number 11. That is Abby, Andrew, Jerry, Lisa. The power of yet. Yeah, well said, Stacy.
Well, Andrew Skinner is supposed to be our spokesperson.
Okay.
He has the most letters in his name.
All right. Awesome.
So,
Andrew, are you with us? There you go.
Yeah. All right. We were also kind of split with like the other group. We had, I think, political and symbolic said we'd go with the younger lady because that is kind of where Keith was. He was kind of leaning towards the younger lady, so I'm sure he'd probably negotiate with that one board member and say like, why is she more? Because the one said she's more qualified, so he'd probably build off of that and persuade them to go with the younger one. So political and symbolic, we had the younger one, and then the other two, the human resource and structural, I think we said would go with the local lady. And we were still kind of debating which one to go with. One of our group members said she would probably, in her preference, go with the younger lady for the new ideas and things like that. But I think we were thinking of going with the local resident because she's already there in the community, and the younger lady lives far away. So we don't know if she comes to the school and it's not her atmosphere. Like, I don't know if she's from a bigger city. Jumping to a smaller school setting, she might only be there for a year and then decide this isn't for me and leave. While the local resident, she's been there, so she'd probably be there for long term for a while. So I think we finally decided we'd probably go with the local resident.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. And Amanda scolded me earlier for referring to her as younger, because it should have been local and non-local, or maybe I'll give them names the next time we do this scenario. But because younger, it brings about a bias too, right? When I'm thinking about it. And I think you're wrestling with really good things. And there's some things you just can't ask in an interview, right? How long do you think you're going to stay here? It's been asked in interviews, but it's not a legal question that you can ask, right? So yeah. There's an interesting aspect to power in this scenario too, right? You've read correctly. This is a small community. This is a small school, and in small schools, boards tend to get involved in the hiring process. They don't necessarily delegate that to the principal or to the superintendent. Sometimes they want to say in who's going to be part of their community. It doesn't happen in a bigger community. You wouldn't see that at all, right? That's been delegated. That power has been given to the superintendent, who would typically then delegate it to the building principal or whatever the case might be. So yeah, that's really good. I'm glad we had some differing opinions on that. And I know I was in one of the other groups where they were going to hire the non-local candidate for good reasons as well. So let's see what Keith decided. Am I sharing my screen? Can you see my screen as well? Or do I have to reshare?
Reshare.
Thank you. Good?
We're good.
All right. Here's what happened. Keith knew the board was split on whether to hire the younger, non-local, and more expert teacher, or the local woman who had given hours of support as a volunteer to the school before acquiring her teaching certification. He hesitantly listed the reasons for hiring each candidate and then recommended that the board hire the younger and expert teacher, citing especially her education and strong recommendations from everyone, particularly her supervising teachers and her student teaching experience. He thought she was the teacher the school needed. The board listened, commented, and argued, finally choosing in a close vote the local applicant for her years of service to our school and because we all trust her. And Andy, I think I was listening in on your conversation, and you could see this one happening if I read your comments right, in a school where you are at. Having those connections within the community would be almost a no-brainer. I think you made the comment that, why did they even bring the other candidate? Because the school board is going to hire this one. So good, excellent. Thank you for participating and sharing your thoughts on this one. Yeah, thanks. Good comments in the chat room too. Weekend preview. Couple readings for you from Malpers and Nordhaus again. A little different type of posting, and I want to really encourage you to post by Friday at 6 p.m. for this one. Otherwise, you're going to hold up the rest of the crew. So choose one of the 3 chapters to lead an online discussion on in the discussion forum. So from those 3 chapters, choose one concept that captures your imagination. And again, this week is critical that you post within a timely manner by 6 p.m. on Friday with your posts so that other people can respond to your questions. Each discussion leader's final task will be to provide a short summary, key points of your discussion at the bottom of that forum. So what are a couple of new insights shared? What stuck? A couple paragraphs should definitely do it. And there is a possibility of all the discussions being in the same chapter, but I hope not. And even if typically within the same chapter, people pull out different things that capture their imagination. No additional assignments this week other than the culture assignment, which was assigned last week, which will be due on the 1st. And then there's one other piece that when you read, I think when you're working on your culture assignment, it's one that just came out, Harvard Business Review, really good piece, I thought. What does it mean to work here? Which is really what you're trying to capture when you think about what's the culture like, what's the water that we're swimming in, and how does it shape and form the people who work here. So. All right, that is all I have for you tonight. So enjoy this week, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for tuning in.
Have a good week.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Tim. See you.